can writers write realistic main characters? How do we do that? Well, today I just wanted to briefly discuss 3 tips that can help us make sure our characters come across as realistic. The first tip is to make sure that they have flaws. Just like nobody's perfect in real life, in a book, we don't want to read about perfect people. That's just boring. When you think about some of the most popular characters on television and in literature, they all have a lot of flaws. For example, Olivia Pope from the series Scandal, which was on a few years ago, she had a lot of flaws. She was having an affair with a married man. She couldn't really be trusted because she tended to lie a lot. She also had a drinking problem. But most people love her because she felt relatable. She wasn't perfect. Another is Sherlock Holmes. He may have been a genius, but he also had substance abuse issues, and he could be a jerk sometimes, a lot of times. Yeah, so it's good to make sure that our main characters have some sort of flaws. A second thing, which seems to go against the first, is to make sure that our main characters also have likable qualities. Um, this is because it's good for them to have flaws, just like a regular person does. But at the same time, the kind of people who we are drawn to and want to be friends with, they also have some redeeming qualities. For example, if you go back to Olivia Pope, yes, she had an affair with a married man for a long time, and she had substance abuse issues with alcohol, and she tended to lie a lot. But she also had a kind heart. She liked to do right by people. Um, she liked to fight for justice. So those were her redeeming qualities. And with Sherlock Holmes, well, I mean, he liked to get the bad guy. He sought justice. He just like Olivia Pope, I guess. He tried to make sure justice was done. Um, yeah, and he also tried to do right by people too. So it's good for us to make sure that our main characters also have something likable about them. Even like Don Draper from Mad Men, who he was a complete mess, but he was also a genius when it came to advertising, and he also liked to help an underdog. So those 2 qualities, I think they really helped people to stay attached to that main character, even though he did some really horrible things throughout that series. The third thing that might help is to make sure that the character's backstory affects their personality, their speech, like their speech patterns, and their decision making in a very obvious way. And this is something I think we forget about a lot. Um, I know when I first started writing, all of my characters, they sounded the same. If you would read a page of dialogue between 2 different characters, they would both sound the same. Because I hadn't yet put together what's obvious in real life. When you meet a person in real life for the first time, and let's say they talk like this, they talk a little bit like this with a country twang. Well, you're going to think, oh, their backstory must be that they're from the deep south in the United States of America. You figure that out about their backstory. And if they use, even if they don't have a country twang, but they use expressions like, I'm going to go make groceries, or I'm fixing to go do this, you might also think, okay, their backstory is that they might be from the South. You kind of figure things out about people based on their speech patterns. How do they speak? What words do they choose? And that should be reflected in the characters that we write about as well in our stories. Also, like I mentioned, backstory affects our personality. Even though we're all born with a genetic, I guess you call it disposition towards a particular personality, our environment also shapes the way that we perceive ourselves and perceive other people. And that's just common sense. We all know that. But it's just kind of like putting that common sense into the way we write our characters. That's what makes a story really come to life and makes a character seem realistic. For example, let's say that a person who is naturally shy and quiet, that's their personality, but they grew up in a big family in a big city, like let's say Manhattan, New York. How would growing up in a big family in a big city affect someone who is introverted, naturally introverted, and shy? Well, they might be a little more, a bit, how do I put this? They might be better able to tolerate loud loudness and lots of activity and a lot going on than the average introvert because that's what they grew up around their whole life. So if this were a character in a story, it might be nice to see her inner thoughts while she is, see that, all of that, it reflected in her inner thoughts while she's in a situation, maybe at work or I don't know, with friends, where she is the only introvert and there's a bunch of extroverts and there's a bunch of mess going on around her. We could see her um, thinking things like, oh, this is not my cup of tea, but I am used to this. It reminds me of, growing up with six brothers who were loud mouths and, or I don't know, or having to fight my way to the subway in New York City to get to school or something. I don't know. I'm just using really bad examples to explain that it would be good if we could see the character's backstory or how their history of how they grew up affects their personality today as we're reading about them. Also, how it affects their speech patterns or speaking patterns, and how it affects their decision making. So, yeah, just make sure that we weave that backstory in to character development. And that will help the character to feel like a real person. Um, make them feel whole and like they have lots of dimensions to them. So again, those three tips on how to make our characters come to life and feel more realistic is, first of all, make sure that they have relatable flaws. Make sure that they also have redeeming qualities that make them likable. And third, we want to make sure that their backstory or their history is reflected in their personality, in the way they talk, and in the decisions that they make. That will all make our characters seem more realistic. Um, if you want to check out some of the books that I write, you can visit my website. It's authorpaulaLjones.com. And also, you can subscribe to this channel if you want, because I talk about writing at least once a week and talk about other things throughout the week. All right, well, thanks for watching. Bye.